Imagine living in a mansion where the roof is leaking, the foundation is crumbling, and the electricity is only running because you're paying the bill with a different credit card every month. You're still throwing the most expensive parties in the neighborhood to convince everyone you're rich, but eventually you run out of pockets to put the new cards in. At some point, you have to stop buying champagne and start buying shingles. This isn't a metaphor for your neighbor's spending problem. This is the United States of America in 2026. Right now, everything looks fine. The stock market just hit another all-time high. The Federal Reserve thinks they've finally wrestled inflation to the ground. Unemployment is low. Consumer confidence is up. Arby's just released steak nuggets. On the surface, life is good. But underneath the glitter and the grease, there's a crisis bubbling that nobody wants to talk about. While you're busy debating whether the Fed will cut rates by a quarter point or a half, the United States government is blowing through cash faster than a bachelor party at 2 in the morning in Miami. Welcome to the era of the $38 trillion credit card. The number is so big it doesn't even register anymore. $38 trillion, that's the current national debt. To put that in perspective, if you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you over 100,000 years to spend $38 trillion. The Roman Empire would have still been around when you started. But here's what makes it worse. We're not just sitting on $38 trillion in debt. We're actively adding to it every single year, faster and faster. The United States government is shockingly similar to a guy going through a midlife crisis. But instead of buying an overpriced Corvette and getting a regrettable tattoo, Uncle Sam is blowing trillions on tanks, healthcare programs, and monthly checks for 70 million retirees. We are acting like a college freshman with a credit card and zero concept of consequences. The kind of kid who sees a $10,000 credit limit and thinks, cool, I have $10,000. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The United States has been an unprofitable business since 2001. 24 years of red ink. We spend more than we bring in every single year, without exception. And recently, we've decided to make fiscal irresponsibility our new national pastime. We are currently running a nearly $2 trillion annual deficit. That means every year, we spend $2 trillion more than we collect in taxes. $2 trillion. That's not the total debt. That's just the amount we're adding this year alone. When the debt collectors come knocking, we don't cut back. We don't have an emergency budget meeting. We just borrow the difference and keep the party going. But borrowing isn't free. And this is where the math starts to get genuinely scary. The United States now spends over $1 trillion a year just to service the interest on its debt, not paying down the principal. Not reducing what we owe, just interest. Just the cost of having borrowed the money in the first place. $1 trillion a year just to keep the lights on and the debt collectors off the front lawn. To put that in perspective, we now spend more on interest than we do on national defense, more than we spend on veterans' benefits, more than we spend on income security programs. Interest has become the fastest growing expense in the federal budget, rising by 34% in just the last 2 years. Think about that. We are paying $1 trillion a year for the privilege of being in debt. That's not building roads. That's not funding schools. That's not curing diseases. That's just the monthly minimum payment on America's credit card statement. And it's only going to get worse. Because here's the thing about debt, it compounds. The more you borrow, the more interest you owe. The more interest you owe, the more you have to borrow to pay the interest. It's a spiral, and we're in it. Now, whenever this topic comes up, politicians love to talk about cutting spending. They get on television and scream about waste and inefficiency. They promise to trim the fat. They always point to the same usual suspects. Foreign aid is the favorite punching bag. Cut foreign aid, they say, and we'll fix everything. But here's the gut punch. Foreign aid is about 1% of the federal budget. In 2024, we spent $78 billion on it. $78 billion sounds like a lot. It is a lot. But if we cut foreign aid to zero tomorrow, it would only fund 19 days of Social Security payments. 19 days. The reality is that 70% of the federal budget is eaten by just 5-line items: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, national defense, and interest. Those 5 things consume almost 3/4 of every dollar the government spends. Everything else, all the programs people argue about, all the agencies people want to shut down, all of it combined is less than 30% of the budget. Trying to fix the debt by cutting foreign aid or PBS or the National Endowment for the Arts is like trying to lose weight by switching from regular Coke to Diet Coke while you're still eating 3 Big Macs for lunch every day. It's not going to move the needle. So if we can't cut our way out, what about the other side of the equation? What about raising taxes? Here's the problem. Even if you raised taxes on every single American, even if you doubled income tax rates across the board, you still wouldn't close a $2 trillion deficit. The math doesn't work. We've spent ourselves into a corner where neither cutting spending nor raising taxes can fix the problem without causing massive economic pain. And nobody wants to be the politician who delivers that news. So instead, we just keep borrowing. We keep adding to the credit card. We keep pretending that the bill will never come due. But the scariest part isn't just the government. It's that the rest of America is following the same playbook. If Uncle Sam can max out every card he owns, why shouldn't we? Total household debt has exploded 60% over the last decade, reaching a record $18.6 trillion. Credit card debt just hit $1.4 trillion. Auto loans are at $1.6 trillion. Student loans are at $1.7 trillion. Americans are drowning in debt, and we're pretending it's normal. We're pretending it's fine. Debt has become the duct tape holding the entire economy together. We aren't saving for the future. We're financing the present, one installment plan at a time. The new car, the kitchen renovation, the vacation to Cancun, the 65-inch television. Everything goes on cray later. Worry never. And when people can't afford their credit card payments anymore, they just open a new card to pay off the old one. Sound familiar? The American economy doesn't look like the booming powerhouse you see on CNBC. It looks like a giant game of hot potato where everyone is desperately hoping they aren't the one holding the bag when the music finally stops. Here's what that looks like in practice. You go to the mall, the stores are packed, people are buying, the economy looks healthy. But if you zoom in, most of those purchases are happening on credit. Buy now, pay later. 0% financing for 12 months. Minimum payments only. The spending isn't coming from income, it's coming from borrowed money. And that works great until it doesn't. When credit dries up, when interest rates rise, when banks stop lending, the entire system seizes. Because the economy isn't built on real wealth anymore. It's built on the illusion of wealth. It's built on the assumption that tomorrow's money will always be there to pay for today's lifestyle. This is what economists politely call a highly leveraged system. Normal people would call it a house of cards. And the government is the dealer. Every time someone suggests we need to rein in spending, the response is always the same. We can't cut Social Security. We can't cut Medicare. We can't cut defense. We can't raise taxes. We can't do anything that might upset anyone. So we do nothing. We just keep borrowing. The dirty secret is that our entire economic model is based on the assumption that growth will always outpace debt, that the economy will keep expanding fast enough to make the debt manageable, that we can grow our way out of this. But what happens when growth slows? What happens when we hit a recession? What happens when the tax revenue drops but the bills stay the same? We borrow more. That's what happens. We add another trillion to the pile and hope for the best. Japan tried this strategy for 30 years. They're still trying. Their debt to GDP ratio is over 250%. The United States is currently at 124% and climbing fast. Japan has been stuck in economic stagnation for decades. Low growth, low inflation, an entire generation that has never experienced a booming economy. That's what happens when you let debt spiral out of control, and we're following the exact same playbook. Now, some economists will tell you this is fine. They'll say that government debt isn't like household debt. They'll say that as long as the US can print dollars and people keep buying treasury bonds, we can keep this going forever. They'll point out that interest rates are still relatively low by historical standards, that investors still see US debt as the safest investment in the world, that the dollar is still the global reserve currency. And they're right, for now. But that's the key phrase, for now, because the only reason this works is because the world still believes in the United States. They believe we'll pay our debts. They believe the dollar will hold its value. They believe we're the safest bet in a dangerous world. But belief is fragile, and it can evaporate faster than you think. If investors lose confidence, if countries start dumping treasury bonds, if the dollar loses its status as the reserve currency, the whole system collapses overnight. Interest rates spike. The cost of borrowing explodes. The government can't afford to pay its bills. And suddenly, the United States is in the same position as Greece in 2010. It sounds dramatic. It sounds like fear-mongering. But it's happened before. To other countries. To empires that thought they were too big to fail. The British Empire was the dominant global superpower for over a century. Then World War I and World War II buried them in debt. By 1946, Britain's debt-to-GDP ratio was over 250%. They were forced to go to the International Monetary Fund for a bailout in 1976. The sun set on the British Empire, not because they lost a war, but because they couldn't pay their bills. Rome didn't fall because of barbarians at the gates. It fell because they debased their currency, inflated their economy, and spent themselves into oblivion trying to maintain an empire they could no longer afford. History is full of superpowers that thought they were invincible right up until the moment they weren't. The United States isn't immune to the laws of economics. We're not special. We're not different. We're just further along in the same cycle that has destroyed every empire that came before us. So what happens next? That's the question nobody wants to answer. Because the honest answer is, nobody knows. Maybe we muddle through. Maybe we keep borrowing and nothing bad happens. Maybe the economy keeps growing and inflation stays low and interest rates stay manageable and we kick the can down the road for another decade or two. Maybe future generations figure out a way to pay off the debt we're leaving them. Or maybe something breaks. Maybe interest rates spike. Maybe a recession hits and tax revenue collapses. Maybe China and other countries start dumping US debt. Maybe the dollar loses its reserve status. Maybe inflation comes roaring back. Maybe the $38 trillion credit card finally gets declined. And when that happens, when the music stops and someone is left holding the bag, it's not going to be the politicians who created this mess. It's not going to be the lobbyists who fought against spending cuts. It's not going to be the corporations who gamed the tax code. It's going to be you. Because when governments go broke, they don't file for bankruptcy like a failed business. They don't just walk away. They inflate the currency, they raise taxes, they cut benefits, they seize assets, they pass the bill to the citizens. The people who played by the rules, who saved money, who didn't max out their credit cards, those are the people who end up paying for everyone else's party. That's how it always works. That's how it's always worked. So here we are, living in the mansion with the leaking roof and the crumbling foundation, still throwing parties, still telling ourselves everything is fine, still paying for today with tomorrow's money. The question isn't whether this is sustainable. It's not. The question is how long we can keep pretending that it is. Because eventually, you run out of credit cards. Eventually, you run out of pockets. Eventually, the bill comes due. And when it does, buying shingles isn't going to be enough. You're going to need a whole new house. The United States has a $38 trillion credit card. We've maxed it out, and we're still spending. At some point, someone is going to have to pay for all this. The only question left is who?